email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Welcome to a special episode of The Conversation. This week, I put together some of the best moments from the year, highlighting the ideas, perspective, and lessons that made these conversations unforgettable. Enjoy.
My guest today is someone who's helped millions of people around the world understand human behavior in a whole new light. Thomas Erikson is a behavioral expert, best-selling author, and the mind behind the international phenomenon Surrounded by Idiots. Thomas, welcome to the show. I've been looking so forward to this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
What advice do you have when you're struggling to work with somebody who is the opposite of you, or how do you what's a common mistake people make when they're trying to communicate with somebody that has a different color profile than their own?
Well, let's say that you're colleagues. You don't have the authority to tell someone to, shape up or anything. But let's say you're sitting and you're sharing your desk and the other person is just weird. Okay. What I would suggest is what I usually do when I mentor people. I say, instead of blaming, doing the blame game, just say, could you and I, could we go for lunch? Could we grab a cup of coffee and just have a chat? Because I have a couple of questions I would like to raise with you. And I would go with something, if you don't have a clue, I don't understand this person, I can make even a sort of a balanced assessment live here. I just don't get him. Maybe you could start with something, I would like us to get along better. And I'm sensing something is a little bit off. It could be me. Could we have a conversation about this? Usually the other person will say, I think you're right. I'm sensing the same thing, actually, because they're not stupid. People aren't stupid. So they would say, yeah, let's grab a cup of coffee and have a conversation. And you can just start it by saying, sometimes when I give you an instruction or when I ask you something, this is how I'm sensing your response. This is my experience. I'm not saying you are doing this, but this is how I experience things. Because people usually start to blame it. You do this and you do that. No, I didn't.
Right.
No, this is how I see it. It could be me. Maybe I'm the idiot. I'm totally fine with that. Let's have a conversation. Most people with an IQ over room temperature will get it. They will just say, you're right. Let's talk about it. We could do better.
Joining me today on The Conversation is Erik Stone. Erik is a seasoned leadership expert and award-winning author, keynote speaker with over 30 years of experience in corporate and nonprofit organizations. His insights are captured in his award-winning book, Jumpstart Your Workplace Culture, and through his international keynote talks and workshops. Erik, thanks so much for joining me today.
Clint, thanks for having me as a guest. I can't wait to get started.
I like how you said in the book that building culture is a journey. And the journey is a destination. And that's kind of how life is. So can you expand on that a little bit, what you mean by that?
Yeah, I could take it to one of my last stops. But geez, listen, there were some talented people, but there was also a lot of opportunities that weren't there. And if you're trying to move an organization with hundreds of employees, as much as we'd like to think we're going to make a decision and everyone's going to be on board, it's just not how it works. You're really turning a proverbial battleship at times. And so you have to take an initiative, and then you've got to take that initiative and tuck it into the training of the organization. They have to have the right material, equipment, and information in order to achieve this desired outcome. And so we would take that. You then have to train everybody, and it's got to be repetitive, kind of a lather, rinse, repeat at times. It's got to be omnipresent. It's got to be in reviews. Your initiative's in training, and it gets reviewed in an employee review, a performance review, or however you do it. And so that takes time. As much as we'd love to say, wave the magic wand, presto, we're good, it took me probably 6 months to really start making some traction in a large organization, that we were starting to celebrate some small victories. And I think that's the key, is we were able to secure a couple of simple wins, and those simple wins, we doubled down on them. And so the analogy of a journey, it just takes a while, and it just never ends. And behind me is really like a symbol. It's an hourglass. For those of you who see the video here, and it's the term hour. Like together, we're going to do this. Not an eyeglass that me and you are both wearing. It's the hourglass. And it's a process because it's a journey. And in the beginning, on the top of an hourglass, as you visualize it, if it's just an audio for some, is just as the gathering, that listen, observe, and learn, seeds of trust being built. What are we going to pull from everybody that's important? Stakeholders, board members, whoever it is, customers, clients, vendors. And you're going to kind of take all that. And as the hour bows out, you're orchestrating some of the commitments, the plans, and things like that until it goes right where the sand is. That is the magic. That is where you amplify your message. The rollout then begins and it goes outward as an hourglass bows out. Training, reviews, reinforcement time. The sand eventually lands on the bottom. And that's where you assess it through whatever assessment tools you may use or have. And on each side of that hourglass are your guiding lights. Those are policies and procedures, mission, vision, values. Those are going to help you guide your decision making. And as you can see, it is a journey. It takes a little bit of time. And right when you think you have it, Clint, as you know better than anybody, new technology comes out, a pandemic, who knows? You turn the hourglass over and really reassess where you are in that process.
Today's guest is someone who doesn't just talk about change. She teaches people how to lead it. She's also the author of Make Waves, Be the One to Start Change at Work and in Life, a book that's been praised for helping everyday leaders step up, speak out, and spark real transformation, even without a title. I'm really excited to welcome Patti Johnson to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, our brains are efficient or lazy. I'll let you pick the word you like best. And they like to look for patterns. And I've seen those memes online where it'll show you a statement, you read it, and then it says, oh, by the way, did you notice these words were reversed? And I actually got my phone out one time because I thought for sure they were tricking me and changing them, right? Yeah. There's no way my brain missed this. And so the brain also likes habits, and some are helpful, but you point out that some can get in our way. What are some of those issues?
Well, habits are very powerful. Yes, I totally, I know our brain looks for the most efficient path. That can cause us to not learn something new because it's a lot faster. I already know how to do it. I don't need to learn the new way. It can cause us to, even just how you spend your time. So as an example, you talk a lot on conversations. In times of high change, there's a pretty good chance your team is going to need more from you for them to be effective. Not just a feel-good move, but they're trying to figure out, oh, wait, the way we used to do it doesn't work anymore. So if you're spending your time, you're playing, I'm the efficiency person, and I don't have enough time to meet and talk with my team one-on-one, those habits are driving you. They're at the wheel, and you are sitting in the back seat. And so, I think we all, I will say for me, that's something I really have to work on is like, what are my habits because habits, you don't even think about it anymore, right? You just drive to work and, I don't know how I got here. I didn't remember driving here. That we've all done that on a variety of things. And the other thing is being very curious in times of change is important in your habits. If you are on road all the time, you're not noticing, that's really different. That adaptive persistence is kind of my term for what I found. And those two words can feel in conflict. But just like we've been talking about, being adaptable, but also being persistent. If you think I'm adaptable, on one end of the spectrum, you're somebody that's changing your mind every day. You know what you're doing. But if you're persistent, sometimes people think of that as somebody that's taken the hill. I'm not looking back. I've already decided this is what I'm doing. You're looking for that ability to do exactly what you just said, Clint. Like, I'm going to figure this out as I go. What do I learned that I didn't know before? What needs to be updated and changed? That is the expected behavior, not a mistake. And so I think people that have that ability to move without all the answers. And I love one of the quotes, actually, Tammy Pinkston said that's always stuck with me is, in times of high change, if you have all the answers, you've waited too long.
Joining me on the conversation today is David Burkus. David is the best-selling author of 4 books about business and leadership. His books have won multiple awards and have been translated into dozens of languages. His insights on leadership and teamwork have been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, USA Today, Fast Company, the Financial Times, Bloomberg Business Week, CNN, BBC, NPR, and CBS This Morning. Wow. I'm tired just talking about all that. That's awesome. A former business school professor, David now works with leaders and organizations across all industries, including Pepsi, Fidelity, Adobe, and NASA. David, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And you missed one. You forgot the conversation with you, right? So there we go.
We'll add that to the list now.
Love it.
Because I'm sure you've seen that there's 20 people in the room, 20 people on the team. There are 2 or 3 that want to dominate the conversation, and they're happy. They're happy to do all the talking. Another 2 or 3 that will answer if asked, but the rest of them are looking around going, "Why am I even here?" Mm-hmm. And so, it occurs to me, do you have any tricks for how you would draw those people out? Because you mentioned you pick up on the nonverbal cues, right? Clint crosses his arms, so clearly he doesn't agree, but I don't say anything. How do you get me to engage without putting me on the spot going, "Clint, you clearly don't agree. So what do why don't you agree?" Because some people will shut down at that point.
Yeah. Or if you haven't heard from him in a while and you say, "Hey, Clint, I haven't heard from you in a while. What do you think?" Well, now you're like on the spot and you're nervous and you feel called out. And then whatever you say is probably going to be whatever popped into your head now instead of what the truth was that you were thinking about, right? It's probably the worst thing you can do is just call out people you've heard from, right? So I have 2 different tactics depending on the nature of the teams that I work with, right? Like it sounds like you do a lot of work with teams on an ongoing basis. Hey, we sign up for an 18-month or a 3-year project, so I'm going to work with these people a lot. I do the inverse. A lot of times we have some pre-work ahead of time. We're into the offsite or the conference or whatever it is, and then we're out by the end of that day or the next day or what have you. So when it's a one-time interaction, here's the trick that I like to use a lot, which is if I'm noticing there's a huge dichotomy between certain people are sharing all the time, certain people are not hearing, the next time we come to a discussion point, I go, okay, time out. Before we discuss as a group, let's do this. Let's put this question up there and let's break into like groups of 2 or 3 people and let's just talk about it individually first. And then we'll come out and share. And that there's nothing abnormal there. But when we come back, here's what I say. I surprise them and I go, okay, I want to take a chance to hear from every single group, but here's my rule. If you're sharing, I don't want to hear from an idea. I don't want to hear an idea that you contributed to the small group discussion. I want to hear something somebody else said that you want to give voice to. And so now often it's like flipped. The over talkers are pulling an idea from the under talkers and talking about it because they just want to share, right? And even though it's not their idea, they're still going to share because they just want to talk, right? And so now you sort of draw that out a lot of times. So I pull that trick in one-off scenarios a lot of times. When I'm working with a group for the long term, and we talk about this briefly in the book, I use a strategy I call amplify unheard voices. You can't make someone who's not contributing a lot talk. You can silence an over talker in front of everybody, right? And that kind of encourages them. But you can't make them, you can't call them out. It's going to make them uncomfortable. What you can do is really pay attention to the times they are contributing, even if they just say like a subtle, like, yeah, or not, or, it's not a full share, but they came out in agreement with somebody else. You can use your facilitator power or your leadership power to stop and put the spotlight on them to amplify the unheard voice that you're now hearing. Hey, Clint, I know that was brief, but can you double down a bit more? Like you said, you agree. What is it you really like about that idea? So what I did there was I literally just took a flash of agreement of Clint just saying, yeah, that's a good idea. And I said, nope. Okay, we're going to focus in on you, Clint. Let's talk about your idea for a second. I'm not calling you out and making you feel uncomfortable, but when you do contribute, and maybe you actually do speak up and offer a whole different idea, then I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. Let's build on that for a little bit. Just whatever I can do to amplify the voice when it is heard sends the message that, yeah, I really do want your contributions. You're not going to get judged for them. You're not going to get ridiculed for them. You're going to get praised for them. And maybe, just maybe, you'll do them a bit more often.
Joining me today on the conversation is Urs Koenig. Urs is a leading leadership strategist, executive coach, keynote speaker, and author with a truly unique background that spans military command, ultra-endurance sports, and boardroom strategy. He's the author of Radical Humility, a bold and timely book that challenges traditional top-down leadership models. Urs, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Clint. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So was there a personal or professional turning point that made you realize the power of humility in leadership?
There wasn't one. So, if I had to point to one thing, it's really these peacekeeping missions. So within the peacekeeping missions, there were plenty of experiences. I can, tell one quick story, or anecdote, which I tell in the book. My commander in the Balkans, actually in Kosovo, he opened a meeting with me with these words. He sat me down, was a colonel, I was a captain. He sat me down in his office and he said, Urs, I love you. I do. And your work is not even close to being good enough. So he was tough on results, tender on people. And so I knew that, and his words made me shrink in my chair. So But the point of the anecdote is, if he would have yelled at me, if he would have tuned me out, then I would have just tuned him out. It's another high-ranking officer. But I knew, because I worked with him for the last 6 months, he really cared about me. He knew my background. He knew what I wanted to do. He knew about my personal life. He really cared for me. And because he was tender on people, he cared for me. He was able to be tough on results, and I was able to really hear his feedback.
Yeah. So what are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about humility and leadership?
Oh, look, the biggest is, so if I'm humble, am I a pushover? Am I weak? Do I not have confidence? So, I turn this around. I say you actually have to be fundamentally confident in yourself if you want to show up with true humility. So think about it. Only if I have a real strong sense of self, fundamentally confident in my skills, my abilities, am I actually able to ask you for feedback. So Clint, so what can I do better? If I'm insecure, then I cover up my insecurity with arrogance, right? And so I believe that we need to be fundamentally confident to actually show up with humility. And similarly, people challenge me and, okay, then I'm humble, I'm a pushover, I'm not ambitious. No, it requires really humility to ask the hard questions. So Clint, why do we not achieve what we need to achieve? What's my part in this? How can I do better? That's humility, but we need to ask these hard questions in order to achieve hard goals, which is a definition of ambition. And so I believe they go hand in hand. And I think it's more than semantics, actually. So humility does not mean being a pushover. I can be deeply humble, show up with radical humility, and still stand very strong and very confident in my position and talk about my skills, my background, what I know, and also what I do not know. And so to me, it's that's the biggest misconception people have from the outset.
Today's guest is someone who brings a rare blend of heart, humor, and deep perspective to how we could talk to each other. Amy Sandler is a speaker, executive coach, and mindfulness teacher who currently serves as principal coach and podcast host at Radical Candor. So welcome to the show, Amy. So happy to have you here.
I am really excited to be with you today and to have this conversation, Clint.
So I'm lucky enough that I get to work with most people face to face, and you can build trust not only through what happens in the meetings, but you get to know them personally, and you're talking to them over lunch or over coffee, and you kind of establish a rapport with that person. But in today's world, when there is so much virtual and or hybrid, I feel like trust might be a little bit harder, or you may have to get to it differently. So how do you see that from your world if you deal with a lot of virtual teams? How do you build trust so that you can actually have radical candor?
I do think we have to be a bit more intentional when we're in a remote or virtual environment. There's been some very interesting research about with emotions, like video versus phone. I think what's most important is that it's a real-time conversation. We don't want to have these conversations in Slack or, oh, hey, thumbs up. Like, we want it to be a real back and forth. So whether it's phone or video, but you want to bring in sort of the body language. And that kind of gets us to emotions. And when I think about how people build trust, when that question comes up, I always like to sort of put the question on the person, how do people build trust with you? And I think it's a very good conversation for you to have for yourself, for you to have with the people that you work with. And it very often shows up with Care Personally and Challenge Directly, like, oh, I could trust that I knew if I was messing up, this person was going to tell me. One of the biggest decays in psychological safety is that feeling of like, oh my gosh, there's this side conversation that everyone is in that I don't know about. This feeling like everyone is sort of talking about me. Do you know what you know what I'm talking about?
What is it? It's what's the word? It's not a conspiracy if it's true or something.
Yeah. It's like I might be crazy. Like maybe I'm crazy. Like they might still be saying that.
Maybe they really are talking about me.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting with trust, psychological safety, and radical candor. In fact, so Amy Edmondson, the Harvard Business School professor who coined psychological safety, as you probably know, she and Kim Scott have done some work together. We've all done some work together, and looking at the relationship between candor and psychological safety. And in fact, they're mutually reinforcing. So I'll give you one example. I was just about to teach a course called Improvising Radical Candor. I don't know if you're familiar with improv. the Second City group, right? So, love improv. And so we were just about to go on stage. I just met these improvisers. This one guy comes out of the restroom. His fly is down. And my first thought was, who's going to tell this guy that his fly is down, you know? And it's like, Amy, it's you. First of all, you're teaching radical candor. And number two, like there's literally no one between this guy and the audience. So I pulled him to the side. I told him he was hilarious. He was an improviser. But I share that story for a few reasons. First of all, just kind of naming that, like, I teach this to hold myself accountable to practice it. Like my default is going to be like, oh, someone else is gonna do this, or somehow he's magically gonna figure out that he needs to zip his fly, right? No. Yeah. But also because before we go on stage for our podcast, or we record the podcast, we say to each other, "Got your back." And that's actually what we do in improv. We say to each other, "Got your back." And so you think about this link between trust and candor. I can go on stage or I can record the podcast because I know if I'm messing up, somebody's going to tell me. And I know if I'm doing something really well and they want to see more of it, they're going to tell me. And so these are mutually reinforcing. Like it builds trust when we actually share what's not working, because we know, oh, I don't have to worry. Like if I'm messing up, someone's going to tell me, rather than finding out a year later, Amy, you've been making the same mistake over and over and over.
Joining me today on The Conversation is Joey Havens. Joey is a leadership expert, CPA, and author with a 30-year history of growing leaders and elevating others. He believes in growing leaders faster through intentional sponsorship and bold transparency, a philosophy he shares in his latest book, Leading with Significance: How to Create a Magnetic People-First Culture. Joey, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Clint. What a pleasure to be here with you.
Now, in the book, you mentioned, quote unquote, good enough culture. What is that, and why is it really good enough?
Well, it's not good enough because if you look at let's look at Gallup and what it says about today's workplace. Over 51% of people are looking for another job. They just recorded the historical low for engagement of people. Trust has never been recorded lower, lack of respect. And so we really have an epidemic of loneliness, burnout, lack of purpose. There's a book out tomorrow, mine, which did another big study on the U.S. workforce. Over 90% of people don't have enough meaning in their work. They need more meaning. They need to know why it matters. So we truly have an epidemic when it comes to workplace culture. And I've interviewed thousands of professionals now, and if I ask you about your culture, over 80% of them will say, we have good culture and we pay our people well. And they'll say it louder and louder. And yet we've got this epidemic, and they've got turnover, and they've got problems, and they have low retention. But we all protect that. It's almost like our self-identity, especially of our leaders. They protect that. And so we're in denial about what good culture really is. And in fact, my recent TEDx talk, I really dived into magnetic energy in the workplace culture, and it's just gotten a phenomenal reception.
Let's jump into that then. I was going to ask you later, but what is magnetic energy?
You know, I think magnetic energy, the best way I found to explain it is this discretionary effort where, you know, you're just all in. And, you know, in my TED Talk, when I talked about one of the secrets, we've all experienced magnetic energy. Just think about a team you've been on. It might be a work team, a project team, a community project, a church team. You have been a sports team. You have been on a team where you could feel the energy. You knew this team was going to accomplish more than you could yourself. Your self-awareness went up, your expectations, your performance, your focus. We've all experienced magnetic energy, and that's what people are looking for in the workplace. You can't touch it, but we've all felt it, and we know it when a team has it.
Today's guest is an individual who definitely understands how to perform under pressure. He's a retired Navy SEAL officer with over 20 years of service, during which he completed 13 overseas deployments, including 11 to Iraq and Afghanistan, and led the rigorous training and selection process for an elite SEAL command, identifying the attributes that drive peak performance. Rich Devaney is also the best-selling author of The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance, a game-changing book that helps people and teams understand not just what they do, but who they are. Rich, welcome to the conversation. It's so nice to talk to another Navy guy.
Well, thank you, Clint. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So what are attributes, and how do you define them, and why are they more important than skills?
Yeah, I mean, attributes are, in fact, the qualities about a human being that, when it comes to performance, tell us that that human being has what it takes to do the job versus knows how to do the job. I was talking to a Navy SEAL instructor. He had been a SEAL instructor well before I had gone through SEAL training. And he said, Rich, there's a story of a kid who showed up at SEAL training one day, and he walked into the instructor's offices and said, I want to be a Navy SEAL. And the instructor said, well, okay, you have to do a swim test. The kid said, fine. And so they took him out to the pool. It was an easy test. It was 50 meters. So 25 meters to one end, 25 meters to the other end. Anyway, this kid gets all ready to go, and he jumps into the pool and then proceeds to sink to the bottom of the pool. And at the bottom of the pool, he starts walking across the bottom of the pool to one end. He touches one end and he walks across the bottom of the pool back to the other end. And he comes up, he's gasping for air, nearly drowning. And the instructor looks at him and says, what the heck are you doing? And the kid, who's still trying to catch his breath, looks at the instructor and says, I'm sorry, instructor, I don't know how to swim. And at that point, the instructor pauses and he looks at the kid and says, that's okay, we can teach you how to swim. And the idea is, why did the instructor say that? He said that because he knew if this kid had the qualities, the attributes to show up to Navy SEAL training without knowing how to swim, he had everything inside of him we needed for him to be a Navy SEAL. Teaching him the skill of swimming was going to be the easy part. And so what we have to understand as teams, as businesses, as organizations, is we have to understand these attributes. We have to dive into them if we want to find the people who, in fact, are going to be the culture fit, the quality fit that we're looking for.
There's a story early in the book that really hooked me because I do a lot of teaming, and you talk about Julie, whose first big project didn't go very well, despite having, like you just said, her dream team on paper. The resumes were amazing. So what happened there?
Yeah, so I mean, Julie fell into the same trap we often all fall into, and I call it the dream team paradox. And it's this idea that let's pick the best people for a team, the best graphics designer, best marketer, best salesperson, best legal person, whatever that is. And if we have the best people, they'll make the best team. And that often happens when everything is going well. But as soon as something doesn't go well, as soon as what hits the fan, as soon as the plan takes a turn, often those teams turn toxic. And it's because we haven't picked the team based on these qualities, these attributes. And so we have to avoid this idea of picking a team based on the best parts. A great way to explain this, I was researching a guy years ago, and his name was Russell Lakoff. And Russell Lakoff had some interesting titles. He was a systems theorist, behavioral analyst, and management science expert. And he used to give lectures I used to watch on YouTube in the early days of YouTube. And his lectures were fascinating. But one of the things he used to say in his lectures, he used to ask the group, he said, if I took the best parts of every best vehicle on the planet and put them all together. So for example, let's say the Porsche has the best engine, a Ferrari has the best carburetor, a Jeep has the best suspension, whatever that is. Took the best parts of every best vehicle on the planet and put them all together in the center of the room. Would I have the best vehicle on the planet? And the answer is no. You wouldn't even have a vehicle because the parts wouldn't fit together. And what he used to say is a system is never the sum of its parts. It's a product of their interaction. And the same goes with a team. A team is never the sum of its parts. It's a product of how that team interacts. So if you try to put together a team based on skills, if they're not interacting together, you will have a toxic team. And that's why attributes are important.
Today's guest has dedicated her life's work to something that's often talked about in leadership, but rarely practiced well, which is listening. She's the author of 3 influential books that challenge us to go beyond the surface, beyond personas, beyond demographics, beyond assumptions, and tune into what drives people at their core. Andy, I'm really honored to have you with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Clint. I'm super happy to be here.
In the book, you said we depend on body language, tone of voice, and the other person's reaction to our input to let us know where we should take the conversation next. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, if you're doing text-based listening sessions, you tend to lose a lot of that, don't you?
So that's an or in that sentence, not an and.
Okay.
I normally do my listening sessions without visual. I either do them audibly. If we use Zoom, we don't turn on cameras. Sometimes we do turn on cameras. Often I'll just do it by phone. Okay. I do them in person, but I will always do one by phone or by Zoom first so that we can get a sense of each other's minds. I do this because, and this kind of gets back to that demographics thing, we are good at recognizing patterns. And if you see somebody who's wearing headphones and your pattern is that everybody who's wearing headphones is trying to drown out the rest of the world, and therefore they're probably not going to be open, right? That's your assumption about this person who has headphones on. Okay. If I see that you're wearing headphones, and that is going to go through my head because I can't stop it, right? The other part is that we're really good at recognizing patterns and acting quickly on them. So it's like, it's already gone through my mind that you're not going to be very interested in giving me answers. I'm like, no, let's leave this alone. And so if I don't see that you have headphones on, maybe that won't run through my mind, and I won't have that in the back of my mind about you not being willing to give me answers. Okay. Yeah. This goes for other kinds of demographics as well. You see somebody who's, got spinach between their teeth, right? That is not a demographic, but it would be a fun one.
Wait, let me see. Do I? Hold on. Is she trying to tell me something?
Exactly. You see somebody who is a certain shape, a certain gender, or representing in a certain way. That reaction is going to go through your mind. You can't stop it. And then you have to deal the rest of the time with undoing that reaction that happened in your mind, or trying to close it off, close the door. So
it's a way of filtering out our biases, basically, taking some of that off the table, not judging the book by the cover. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And exactly. This is not going to happen between a manager and an employee. But yeah, I mean, there's maybe it would work really well when you're interviewing people for jobs. This actually was something that happened in symphonies not too long ago, like in the 70s. They used to do auditions and they would not hire the females because it was mostly males playing in the symphony. So they put up a screen and they could still hear when heels came, then they thought, oh, it's a female. So they put in a carpet and a screen, and all of a sudden, half the symphony is women.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
Right?
Hidden biases.
Yeah, exactly. We can't stop them. It's not like we're supposed to do penance because we've had this. Whatever, the thought's going to happen. Is there a way that I can make it so that I'm a little bit more clean and open-minded to understand your mind?
Right.
Okay.
My guest today is someone who has spent his career helping people be clear, more confident, and most importantly, more human when they communicate. Rob Biesenbach is a communication expert, author, and actor who brings together a unique mix of experience. He's the author of 3 books, all aimed at making communication less about scripts and more about showing up with honesty and impact. His latest, Unleash the Power of Storytelling, Win Hearts, Change Minds, Get Results, was an Amazon bestseller and the reason I'm having to talk today. He believes you don't have to be theatrical to be effective. You just have to be real. Rob, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Clint. I'm glad to be here.
We're certainly glad to have you. Now, you say we need to build a collection of stories before we need them. So why, and what are some suggestions on how we might do that?
Yeah, I have a story audit tool, and I keep telling myself I should come up with a more positive name than audit, but story inventory, story bank. But my contention is that everyone, every professional, every person should have a bank of stories ready to go for any predictable issue that comes up. So you do an audit. Who are the people I most need to influence? Well, my immediate boss, our board of directors, my customer, make a list. What are their biggest concerns? Cost, schedule, overruns, human capital, whatever it might be. How can I scour my experience and think, where have I come across this issue before? How can I put that into a story and be ready with it? Oh, I know you're concerned about X. This reminds me of a time when,
Right. And are there simple exercises or practices that people can do to become better storytellers? So when you take your training, are there takeaways that they can go back and practice?
Yeah, I have a simple structure I use. I mentioned it earlier, character, goal, challenge, resolution. And we walk through some examples like Romeo and Juliet, or we ask them for popular movies or TV shows that are important to them. We break it down. And I tell people, as your homework, be a little more analytical when you're streaming a show or watching a movie or reading a book or listening to a song. Break it down. Who's the character? What's the goal? What's the challenge? How does it resolve, or does it resolve? And the more you exercise that muscle, the more, I think, instinctive it will become to you, and the more maybe you'll look for it and find it out of the world.
How do you build an environment where people do their best, most meaningful work day after day? Today's guest has spent his career answering that question at the highest level. Todd Henry is a renowned author, speaker, and advisor who helps leaders around the world unleash brilliant creative work. He's the author of 6 powerful books, each packed with frameworks to lead teams with authenticity, foster innovation, and drive results that matter. Todd, thank you so much for joining us today on The Conversation. I can't wait to get started.
Clint, it is so good to finally see you face to face. We've been talking about doing this for a while, so I'm glad we were finally able to make this work.
I really, really appreciate it. In the book, you said that, I was really surprised when I read this. It says that creativity needs structure, which was one of the things my perception was, I'm a creative, don't box me in. That's not necessarily the case.
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, I think it's Orson Welles who said that the absence of limitation is the enemy of art. And what that means is we have to have boundaries in order to channel our resources. A river without banks runs dry on the plain, right? But a river with banks runs deep. And so we need boundaries within which to channel our creative energy. In Herding Tigers, one of my later books, I wrote about this concept of bounded autonomy, freedom within limits. And great leaders understand how to set boundaries. So say, hey, here's some clarity around what we're trying to do and what you can and can't do. But anywhere within these boundaries, go for it, right? Like play, experiment, do what you want, but here are the boundaries. So like we're sort of channeling energy, but it's not complete freedom. Complete freedom is not useful to creative professionals. Maybe if you're an artist, maybe if you're just, painting, like making one painting a year, and it's like you have all the time you want because you've got a patron who's just supporting your lifestyle, whatever. But most of us are having to create on demand, meaning we're having to deliver results by Tuesday at 2 p.m. in order to keep our job. Well, complete freedom is not useful. What we need is clarity in the midst of uncertainty, which means boundaries. So most mature creative professionals that I've worked with crave boundaries. They crave direction. They want you to point them in a certain way. And sometimes they'll push you on those boundaries, but the boundaries are useful as discussion points. I always like to say that frameworks are forcing functions. A forcing function, as you know well, in engineering, a forcing function is something that forces you to behave in a certain way, right? Frameworks force you to ask the right questions or force you to look in the right places. And that's what boundaries do for the creative process. They might artificially limit you a little bit, but that's okay, because then you can have the conversation about where you want to push those boundaries and why you want to push them, as opposed to just wide open spaces, which means a lot of wasted energy and paralysis.
Today's guest is someone who embodies what it means to lead with heart and purpose. Claude Silver is the Chief Heart Officer at VaynerX, where she's redefining what modern leadership looks like by putting emotional optimism, empathy, and human connection at the center of the workplace culture. She's also the host of the podcast, Emotional Optimism, Living in the Silver Lining, a platform where she shares vulnerable, thoughtful conversations about what it means to be human in business and in life. Claude, welcome to The Conversation.
Thank you so much, Clint. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Now, on your website, it says your life's purpose is to be of joyful service and unlock emotional optimism in all. So help me. I'm always a big fan of semantics and getting their definition of things. So how do you define emotional optimism?
Yep. Emotional optimism is really the belief and the hope that things will turn around. It's a way to identify and understand and be compassionate about your emotions, whatever they may be, but not hang on to them and have them define you. So, for example, I'm not sad. That situation is making me sad, but I'm not going to stay sad.
Right.
Right? Because I'm going to see my kids later, because the sun is out today, because I'm going to have a great conversation with Clint. Like, the situation makes me ... And we get caught up sometimes in thinking that emotion owns us, and it really starts to strangle us. It identifies us. And when that happens, especially if it's a sad or dark emotion, it's very difficult to feel hope and possibility, and that the sun will shine again, or I can phone a friend and that person's going to remind me that I'm a good human being. So that's emotional optimism. It really is the belief that things are going to get better, but you have to have that. You have to feel optimistic. You have to feel like there's such a thing as possibility. You have to do some of the work.
Yeah. It doesn't mean everything is always rosy. It just means you see there's a good side.
Yeah. It doesn't mean no, because that would be, being a Pollyanna, and that would be toxic positivity, which is not emotional optimism. Toxic positivity is, it's COVID and you're sick and well, don't worry, it's going to get better. You're going to be out of it soon. And it's like, well, no, actually I had to go to the hospital because I had COVID or whatever it is, we've got a lot of stuff going on in the world right now that it's important to be realistic about, and you can still have optimism around.
Sure. Now, what does leading with the heart mean to you in the context, especially in today's corporate environment? I'm really, when I first just saw your job title or your, chief heart officer, that's what immediately drew me in, because that's just not something you see all the time. And yet you're in a corporate environment where obviously bottom lines matter. So first of all, what does leading with the heart mean?
Leading with heart for me is being a human, is literally not putting up armor. It is being like I am with you. This is who I am. This is how I show up. My hair is definitely not perfect. What you see is what you get, but you will get me, and I will be present with you. I will be vulnerable with you. I will trust you first. There's no reason for me not to trust you, right? There's no reason for me not to try at least to empathize with you, even if we, see things completely different, right? Mm-hmm. So it's really leading with heart for me is just leaning forward with humanity, being human rather than being robotic, which is what we've been trained to do for the last 100+ years, right? We've been trained to not show ourselves. You don't know me, don't come too close, right? Certainly don't get your food on my side of the desk, but don't talk to me.
Yeah.
And that's a way to just inhibit yourself and not have a growth mindset, not learn from one another, not be curious about one another. So for me, I could replace heart and humanity very easily, which I really do. And it's really just at the crux of it all. It's how can you feel comfortable being yourself in the workplace?
Today, I'm pleased to welcome Chris Finning to the show. Chris is an internationally recognized author, communication coach, and corporate trainer who is on a mission to make workplace conversations more efficient. He's the author of 4 books, including the one we're going to dive into today called The First Minute, A Guide to Starting Conversations and Get Results. If you've ever felt frustrated by meetings that go in circles, been there, done that, or conversations that miss the mark, you'll get a lot out of today's episode. Chris, it's so great to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's a topic I absolutely love talking about briefly, and it's something that will help a lot of people right away.
Can you explain the core idea behind the concept of the first minute?
Absolutely, yes. There are 2 things in the first minute. But before I go into those, I do need to say when the first minute begins.
Oh, good.
This is almost always the first and strongest objection to these methods. So when we start a conversation with someone, be a human first. If you are bumping into someone at work and you have a question for them, remember to ask how they are, do that relationship building, be interested. But at the moment you want to switch to the work topic, that's when these methods begin. It can feel very robotic, very structured, and most people think, well, but that's just straight into the work. What about being nice and getting to know people?
Yeah. Do
that. But at the moment you've gone, oh, how was the weekend? How's your sports team? I heard they got crushed. What a shame for you. It was good for my side. By the way, Clint, I want to talk to you about. And at that moment, that's when the first minute begins. It's about the transactional work stuff. And then when you get to that point, there are 2 things we need to do. The first is frame the conversation. And that sets it up so the other person knows what we're going to talk about, why you're talking to them, what your key point is, and then they're able to focus on the conversation. And we can go into some of that in a moment. The second thing is then be able to summarize what it is that you're going to say in about 3 lines. I generously give it 45 seconds in the first minute. It usually should only take about 15 to 20. But summarize all the stuff that you might say in a very clear way so that you give the other person a structure for everything else that's going to come afterwards, and they understand and can orient themselves through the conversation. So that first minute is about setting things up, getting people's attention, helping them understand why you're having the conversation, and then being ready to go into all the detail and the wheres and what fors and so on after you've done that.
Well, I like the number 3 in both of the things you're doing in the first minute. You have a framing, the framework, and then you've got the structured, and each of those have a 3-parter, right? There's in the framework, there's 3 pieces.
Yep.
And in the structured piece, there's 3 pieces. So can you just touch on those a minute?
Absolutely. In framing, there are 3 things we need. And in the book, they're called context, intent, and key message. I did a TEDx talk on this and changed the wording slightly to topic, intent, and point, which is a tip, which was a slightly easier to remember acronym. Yeah. But the first part, so that's the first model. Framing is context, intent, key message. The second is a structured summary using goal, problem, and solution, GPS, which sets the direction for the conversation. So it's a neat little acronym that fits with something we're very commonly using for directions. So in framing, we need to tell people what is the topic we're talking about? What is the context for this conversation? And that's usually naming the thing. Hey, Clint, I'd like to talk to you about our client meeting with Adobe next week. It's very obvious that everything I'm going to talk about is now related to that. The second thing is, why on earth am I talking to you about it? That's my intent. I've got a couple of questions. I'd like your help. Very clear intent. You now know that you're in question answering mode. And then the third thing is my point, like the key thing, the headline. So if I only had 5 seconds to speak, I would give you the headline, and it's the most important part of my message. So, hey, I'd like to talk to you about our client meeting with Adobe next week. I've got a couple of questions for you. I'm missing some key information for the report they want. That sets up the conversation.
Our guest today is someone who's obsessed with the science of teamwork. Shane Snow is an award-winning journalist, entrepreneur, and the best-selling author of several books, including the one we're focusing on today, Dream Teams, Working Together Without Falling Apart. And that's not easily done. So in it, Shane unpacks what sets extraordinary teams apart, from cognitive diversity and intellectual humility to the surprising power of constructive conflict. So let's get into it. Shane, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you for having me on the conversation.
So in the book, you talk about cognitive friction and the conflict of ideas rather than people. How does that drive innovation?
Yeah, it's, this was one of the big, I almost named the book Cognitive Friction or, Productive Conflict, because this is, I think the main thing that just doesn't happen on teams that have all the potential. You have all the ingredients, you have the different heads thinking about things, you have the players who have the abilities, but you don't quite get there. And it's, an analogy that I use a lot is you're baking a cake. You're not going to bake a cake if you have 8 different types of flour, but if you get all the different ingredients, eggs and flour and chocolate and milk and all that, you're still not going to get cake if you don't mix the ingredients together. And that's what this cognitive friction is about. It's mixing our different ways of thinking together, combining our ideas, and having that intellectual battle out in order to make something better than just eggs and milk. And the thing that gets really hard about this is precisely what we were just talking about, is when things get personal, when it becomes about you, your ego, or your group defending your position, you being right or you not being wrong, or in a disagreement or a debate. It can be about proving you're better than the other person, or destroying the other person, or just proving you're right. That gets in the way. If we're going to be kind of practical about it, who is right doesn't matter at all. What matters is what is right. What idea wins, not whose idea won. Shouldn't matter. And yet that's where things are wrong. So if you can create a environment or dynamic where you can go hard on the debate or the argument or the disagreement. You can actually talk it through and explore it. And even if it gets, like hard, I guess, really hard, if you can do that without it turning into, I don't like you anymore because of this conversation, then that's where the magic happens. And so what are the ways that you can do that? There's various ways, but I think it's largely it's like a lifelong journey of maturity and wisdom thing for individuals. And for leaders, it's a leadership issue. It's recognizing when human beings naturally get to the place where they're starting to take things personal, or they're, if you're starting to get angry, it means you care. But it might mean, if you're getting angry, that you're caring about how you look, or being right or not being wrong, or, your credibility, and learning to spot those signs as they happen and then taking the pressure away. Often it's, hey, let's take a break. Let's have some one-on-one conversations. Let's get back at it. Or it's, dropping as a leader the little things that you need in order to let that person feel okay. Let their ego be satisfied. Like, hey, what you said there, everyone pay attention. This is really valuable because this is pushing our thinking. Now, that's not the idea that's going to work, but this is the idea that's going to get us to that next idea. So thank you. Like that kind of acknowledgement to like redirect it from like the defensiveness.
Today's guest is Juliet Funt, a globally recognized keynote speaker, appears regularly in top global outlets like Forbes and Fast Company, and is a tough love advisor to the Fortune 500. She is the founder and CEO of the Juliet Funt Group, where she's on a mission to help leaders and teams carve out what she calls white space, those critical pauses that enable clarity and true productivity. She's a force in productivity, clarity, and courageous leadership, and the author of A Minute to Think, Reclaim Creativity, Conquer Busyness, not business, conquer busyness.
Thank you.
And do your best work. I'm thrilled to have her with us today. Thank you so much. Welcome to the show, Juliet.
Thank you. That's like a 1 for 2. About half the people say conquer business, and you go, well, all right, so not quite, but okay.
No, I had to make sure I said busyness. So
You're all good.
I mentioned white space in the intro. And for listeners that may not know, how do you define white space?
All right. So we define white space as time without assignment. It's the open, fluid time that used to be in between things in life. It's the unplanned moment, we call it a strategic pause. It's the moments in between. We don't live in a world anymore where those pauses really exist, because anytime there is a pause, there is a phone handy to just suck up that little pause, or there's anxiety handy just to drive you into the next thing. And what's happened is that the beats of life have become very compressed, where it's just action, 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 action. And it's not open where there are pauses in between. But when you do learn how powerful those pauses are, and I could talk to you for a whole half hour about ways to use the pause, there are beautiful, immediate benefits to people, creativity, to work teams, to the objectivity you can have about your projects, and to your own focus and professional sharpness. Because the brain is not meant to go all day long. It's meant to have some oxygen. And so when we teach it, we analogize it to if you're building a fire. I often open with a story about this, how I grew up in Manhattan and never learned how to build a fire, but finally somebody taught me. And you're supposed to have all the right ingredients, like good fire starter or pine needles and the right kind of wood, but you also need one pivotal thing without which everything will fail, and that is you have to have space in between the combustibles. And that is what draws a tiny spark into a flame. And that is what oxygenates the fire. And we believe that human beings are the same, and work teams are the same, and projects are the same, that they need margin. And that's what we teach. And I happen to have the interesting cred of holding the trademark for the word white space. So we've been teaching it that long. So that's a big part of our work. And, it's always misperceived. Always. I was on a call just yesterday with some gentleman who was saying white space in one sentence, and then in the next sentence talked about how important recuperation is for people. And white space is partially a recuperative tool, but in the book, only 25% of how we use white space is recuperation. There's also white space for creation of ideas and white space for strategic introspection. And there's a lot more that happens in the pause creatively and innovatively than just I take a rest and I feel better. That is part of it, but that's only part of it.
Today's guest is an internationally recognized brand futurist, best-selling author, and sought-after keynote speaker. Simon Mannering is the founder and CEO of We First, a strategic consultancy that helps purpose-driven companies accelerate growth and impact. Today, we're diving into the powerful ideas behind Lead with We and exploring how leaders can unite teams, inspire purpose, and create lasting impact by putting we at the heart of everything we do. Simon, it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Clint. Great to be here as well.
Maybe we can start by explaining the core concept of Lead with We and how it fundamentally differs from the Me First business approaches.
Yeah, I think, consciously or not, for a long time, and in many ways still today, business is self-serving, whether you look at it through the lens of, shareholder returns, whether it's quarterly, reporting, whether it's earnings calls, the markets really dictate. And it's always like, are you going up and to the right? Which is obviously, to some degree, healthy self-interest. But at the same time, often it comes at the cost of collective well-being, because it seems that a smaller and smaller number of people around the world are benefiting disproportionately, while a large number of people and society and communities around the world are really struggling. And I don't think it has to be that either-or proposition. I think that business can thrive in ways that really support society and really support communities. So the me first mentality is really your success, your well-being at the cost of everybody else. The we first approach and leading with we is really about engaging the greatest number of stakeholders in service of the greatest collective benefit. Now, oddly enough, that sounds very altruistic. It sounds like you're doing good for others, but it's actually the most selfish thing you can do. Because only when the whole is well, whether that's the planet, whether it's society, whether it's your community, whether it's your company, only when the whole is well can the parts, as in you, your employees, stakeholders, can they thrive. So actually taking care of the well-being of the whole is really the most selfish thing you can do. So leading with we is about choosing to lead, not sit on the sidelines, not wait for somebody else, not waiting for government or nonprofits or NGOs or foundations to fix it, choosing to lead with taking a collaborative mindset. So it's not just you on your own, but you've got this human scaffolding which shares the load. Lead with we, which is the greatest number of people to create the greatest collective benefit. Again, so that we can be excited about our future, so that, the communities in which we live can thrive, rather than being this zero-sum game where some do well and at the cost of everybody else.
Yeah, I had a boss once who, when he said it was a win-win, it means he won and you lost. That's it. That was the only way it was a win-win game.
And there's little good that comes from pointing fingers, but I think we know in society these days, there seems to be those who are doing very, very well, and there's a growing number of people that are really struggling, whether you're looking at it through the lens of the US, the EU, or different markets around the world. And what I'm so excited about to this day, after 15 years of doing this work, was, but startups, high growth companies, and these big global enterprises, is that I think business is uniquely equipped to deliver to your bottom line and positive impact. And there are so many great examples of companies that are doing that well and that are rewarded for doing so. And I think sometimes we are our own worst enemy, in that, we are all good-natured by heart, and we do care about each other, and we do care about the planet. We are, it's hardwired into our DNA. It's chemically reinforced in our bodies. So I think sometimes that natural disposition gives way to this sort of self-interested mindset, which is often fear-based and scarcity-based. And so we're going to get as much as we can for ourselves and damn the consequences. But that is a very perilous short game. And we need to play a longer game if everyone's going to do well.
Well, that wraps up our special compilation episode of The Conversation. I hope you enjoyed revisiting some of the best moments from the year. A huge thank you to all my guests for sharing their insights, and to you, the listeners, for tuning in and being a part of this journey. Until next time, keep leading, keep growing, keep learning, and most of all, keep conversing.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to ClintonMPaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph managing by commitment at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.